everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I'm your host, Taylor Rockwell. Daryl Grove, not with me, still in the hospital, still on the mend, recovering, should be back early next week, but we're going to give him time off to recover. He is feeling fine, so do not worry, but also I'm sure he appreciates any positivity sent his way, so thank you for thinking of him. But without Daryl, I'm instead going to be talking to Felipe Cardenas of The Athletic. Felipe has been on the show several times. I'm not going to say many. He's not quite reached that point yet, but several times, and I always really enjoy talking to him. This time, he is freshly back from St. Louis, where he was there covering the U.S.'s 1-1 draw with Uruguay. And I want to pause here to say that on tomorrow's show, we're planning to have Joe Lowry back on to help me kind of do a post-mortem of this international break to look at like which players stood out, which players hurt their stock, which players helped, who we want to see more of, who we want to see less of, and getting into sort of the individual performances from some of the U.S. players against Uruguay and also against Mexico. So I say that to say that this conversation with Felipe is a bit more about sort of the philosophy of the U.S. right now, because I'm really interested in his experience covering Uruguay. He gets to kind of sit down and chat with Oscar Tabarez for a little bit, or got to last night, and sort of how Tabarez sees the U.S.'s development, but then how Greg Berhalter sees it, how it relates to other teams that Felipe has covered, specifically Atlanta United, when they were their kind of growing pains early on under Tata Martino, and the kind of correlation to this current iteration of the national team, because obviously, like, you can take a lot of stuff away from that 1-1 draw with Uruguay. Oh, this guy was good, this guy was bad, but it all still has that sort of couching of like, it wasn't like a friendly, and we're not sure how good they were, and so it's tough to draw hard conclusions, which is a thing that I'm going to say for me and Joe to try to figure out how to do. What I wanted to get into with Felipe this time around was sort of where the United States stands in terms of embracing that philosophy, in terms of embracing this new style of play, and how it seems to be manifesting or not manifesting, and the kind of challenges that remain. I think we initially settled on maybe like a quick 15 to 20 minute chat, and then, as we tend to do, went long, because there's lots of great points in there from Felipe. He always brings it when it comes to his appearances on the Total Soccer Show, and for that we're very much appreciative. So with all that said, I will say, joining me now, I've got Mr. Felipe Cardenas of The Athletic. Felipe, thank you very much for taking the time today. I know you're only just getting back into Atlanta from St. Louis, so we very much appreciate you being on the show.
Anytime, Taylor. Always a pleasure.
So you're back in Atlanta now. First of all, I'm glad to know it's always a pleasure. Second of all, you're back in Atlanta, as I said, but last night you were in St. Louis. You were covering the USA-Uruguay game for The Athletic, and I want to talk a lot about the U.S. national team, obviously, but I first want to start with Uruguay, actually, because you were on the show during the Copa America talking about all the different teams, but Uruguay obviously in there as well. So you have more familiarity with them than I do, certainly, than a lot of other people do, certainly. They were without Luis Suarez, Edson Cavani, and Diego Godin, to name a few, last night. They didn't look particularly inclined to press or mark aggressively. A lot of tweets I saw were kind of talking about how they were playing at maybe like 2/3 speed, thereabouts. So I'm wondering if that felt like a standard performance to you from what you've seen of them in the past, or were they trying new stuff and it was maybe more like experimental team?
I think it's a combination. And, for me personally, to see Uruguay up close in the flesh was great. They're a team, they're a very, in my opinion, a classic South American power. Like if you ask them, it's funny because they're very confident and, like professionally arrogant on the field. But they don't tend to put themselves in the same company as Argentina and Brazil, even though they are. I mean, I think if you look at titles and all that, maybe you can argue that they're not, but nobody in South America ever looks forward to playing Uruguay, ever. And so I think that was what we were expecting, like that type of mentality, like the famous, the Uruguayan dark arts, a team that's just going to kind of out-muscle you, out-physical you. And, obviously they're missing some key players that are able to do that. You have Diego Godin, who is, the heart and soul, if you will, of that team. Their center back is out. He's with Inter Milan now, and he was injured, so he didn't make the trip. And then, the big guns in Luis Suarez and Edson Cavani couldn't make it. So that really changed the profile of the team, I think. I do think it changed the way they played. But at the same time, last night, I think we were able to see kind of the future of that team, what it may look like, and what they, some of their strengths. I think their midfield is really classy, really, really like tough to break down. Some really good players. Betancourt, who plays for Juventus, he didn't lose the ball once last night. Like, I don't need to go to Opta and like look at the stats. I was watching. Okay, like I was like watching this guy, and he never lost possession. When he was under duress, he never looked like he was, troubled at all. And I think that just shows really, that caliber of player that Uruguay has. Federico Valverde, who's a 21-year-old now playing for Real Madrid, another guy that looked really clean on the ball, confident in midfield. And I think those, you can see like how what the type of talent that team has. Obviously, Brian Rodriguez from LAFC comes on and, just really dices Aaron Long on a really clinical counterattack that I think what gets lost in that. And now that we're speaking like really truly what Uruguay does, that play comes from, I think, a corner or a set piece, something that happens in their own box, in Uruguay's box. It bounces out to I think, Arrascaeta, who was their number 10, during this camp, and he's sitting at his own, like at the top of his box. He's got a guy on him. I don't know if it's I don't remember. It was Jackson.
I think it was Roldan.
Was it Roldan? Okay,
Yeah, so
he just shields the ball. Just like creates space between himself and the defender, shields the ball, and just kind of one touches it to, I think it's Valverde, who just takes off. And so that to me is like, it's just those little things that they know how to do. They know how to use their body. They know how to, create tempo. Then they see opportunity. And so it was great to see that. I think obviously they weren't full strength, but still, quality side.
I want to go back to your point about Betancourt for a moment, because you were saying like you don't need the stats. You watched him, you observed him, you saw him. With that in mind, like how are you when you're covering these games? Like how are you watching these games? Do you try to watch both teams equally to see what they're doing? Are you looking for particular narratives coming in that then influence how you watch the game?
Yeah, I think it's a little of both. I think for last night's game, and it was funny, I don't know if there's video out there during the day before press conference with Greg Berhalter. I asked him, like, I peppered him with questions about the midfield. And I got to a point where he was like, are you going to ask me another question about the midfield? And I'm like, yeah, actually I am. And so that was my focus last night, was to look at who the U.S. was going to employ in central midfield, because I feel like that's an area that is still kind of up in the air. It's a strong, for the pool, it's pretty deep. There are some good players there, but the roles are undefined. So I felt like that was an opportunity for some other players to step in and make, really make some tough decisions for Greg Berhalter moving forward, as far as who do I have as alternatives to Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams when they're back, and Michael Bradley, who, I still think it's difficult to take him out of that role as kind of that holding midfield number 6. So I was watching that, and so obviously by watching Jackson Ewell pretty closely last night, I was focusing on the central midfield of Uruguay as well, and it was interesting because last night, Oscar Tabarez, who's El Maestro, a legend, an icon in coaching, the Uruguay manager, has been with the team since 2006. Anytime you're in front of him, he will speak philosophically about the sport and how it needs to change, or with the improvements and all that. So he was made available after the game. And I waited, obviously. I actually skipped part of the mix zone to talk to Tabarez last night. And it was worth it, because not only did he give me some just great stuff about just development and really focusing on youth and the U23 level being so important to national teams, but he broke down what happened in the game. And one of the things he told me was, the U.S. to us, like they were like, we studied film, we watched Jamaica from Gold Cup. He didn't say Gold Cup, but I'm pretty sure that's the game he was referring to, and the Mexico game. So again, not sure if he meant the recent one or the Gold Cup, but he did say, and we didn't recognize a lot of the players that were on the field for the U.S. and he mentioned, some of their best players weren't there, obviously alluding to, Christian Pulisic, McKennie, and some other guys. So it caused a little bit of issues for them. And in particular, he said, number 14 played 30 minutes in a free role. We didn't even touch him. And so he's referring to Jackson Ewell, who, if you remember, had a pretty good first half, had a pretty good first 35 minutes. And Tabarez was like, we left him alone for 30 minutes. And so we adjusted and made sure that someone was watching him. And then he said, I think we really did control the second half and someone really dominated. And then he referred to the fluky goal that the U.S. scored. But that was interesting because then when in the mix zone, when I talked to Jackson, I said, hey, so their manager just called you out saying that, you were causing some issues for them. And he was like, yeah, I realized when they adjusted, they had a guy marking me, like kind of tracking me after that. And so it caused little issues for Jackson. They had to adjust as well.
That makes me happy that they had to adjust to Jackson Ewell because I saw that as well, that like for the first 20 minutes he sort of was allowed to do whatever he wanted. But that was really surprising to me because we had Sam on earlier in the week to preview the Uruguay game, and I kind of raised the idea of what do you do against a team that doesn't press. I talked to Tonore about this last night as well, and he was like, yeah, but why wouldn't you press them? Like now you kind of have the blueprint from Mexico of go at them, press them. They're going to be not able to deal with it, at least right now. So with that in mind, it was really surprising to me that Uruguay didn't try to do that at all, that it did take them 20 minutes to kind of decide to mark Jackson Ewell. Is that not a thing they usually do? Do they not usually press? Or do you feel like just because it was new people on the field, they weren't quite as inclined to go for that?
I guarantee, I don't have anyone told me this, but I guarantee to your point, yeah, they probably saw film. They saw what the type of pressure that if you press the U.S. and you put pressure on them like Mexico did, you're going to cause some turnovers in some very dangerous places. I think that is typical of Uruguay, of like capitalizing on mistakes and kind of like counter pressing and being really like having guys that can hunt the ball down in like really dangerous places and putting you in difficult spots. Now, they're not a pressing team, though. I don't think traditionally they have been. But, on kickoff, they went right after the U.S. The U.S. kicked off, had possession, went all the way back to Braguzan and it was Betancourt who was like leading the press like right in the first minute. And I remember thinking like, okay, well, yeah, they maybe that was them saying we're gonna do this for the first 5 and see what happens and see if they play out of it. The U.S. actually did play out of it pretty well. And then, Uruguay, I think, settled into what they normally do, which is like kind of that mid block. And let's be honest, like I think they did coast a little bit. Uruguay, I don't think their foot was on the gas. I was really hoping the U.S. would score first because I think that would have really lit a fire under a lot of the guys playing for Uruguay. I mean, they have guys that are fighting for spots too. There's a Copa America next season. World Cup qualifying starts in March, and so. This wasn't like they weren't just taking it easy, but I don't think they were going like full on, full out. There were moments where they were put under pressure where I could see, Jose Maria Jimenez, Atletico Madrid center back and Cáceres, like where they would realize like, okay, I'm getting beat, and they would really like turn on, like put it in fourth gear and try and get back, and that to me was a sign of like, okay, they're never going to take a night off, but I don't think Uruguay was really like completely dialed in and thinking this is a really important match. I think they spent a lot of energy in that match in Costa Rica.
So I would agree with that about the Costa Rica match. I would agree that maybe like they weren't as dialed in, but then they did have to adjust, which then is like it makes it difficult for me though, because obviously we tend to focus on the U.S. men's national team, and it makes it hard for me to sort of come away from this thinking like, well, was this a good game then? Because even though Uruguay, with everything we've already talked about, like it was still the United States did cause problems on occasion. They looked better in possession. It felt like some things did click. So I'm wondering for you then, like, did you see this as a positive result for the United States in the way they played, or like? I guess the best way to put it is like not even a bad result, but was it more of a just like, yeah, okay, that happened. Let's see what happens next.
Yeah, it's kind of that. It's kind of. I think it's a good result in that they didn't lose. I don't think it would in the big picture, long term, had they lost, it probably wouldn't have mattered. Okay, just because they were playing with the second team, it was really they were missing some key guys, on the U.S. side. But a third consecutive loss would not have been good. For just the PR of this organization, and for Greg Berhalter having to go to another press conference and answer questions about, why isn't this team scoring? Why aren't they winning? What is the mentality? Like, is it fragile? Things like that. So, a draw against Uruguay, I think, was great for the U.S. in that aspect. But when what can you take away from it? It's difficult because it's not. It really did feel like an organized friendly, and so I remember going to these games as a kid, and you're just like, I can't wait to see so and so play. You're not really there to talk about tactics, but I think there was some improvement. I think that, Greg Berhalter put certain players in certain positions where they had to perform. We can go back to Jackson Ewell. I think he, when I talked to him before the game, I asked him, like, you're going to start tomorrow, and you're most likely going to play in a holding role. Is that a role that you're comfortable with? And he said yes. He's like, he can play around the midfield, but he feels that he's more of a number 8. He likes to get closer to the opponent's penalty area, but that he was, willing to play in that number 6 role. And I think he did well. I think now there's an alternative there. There's a young player there that's technically sound. I think he did cause him, personally, he followed, the tactics to a T and was really opening up Uruguay. That diagonal ball was on all night, in the first half to Jordan Morris, and he was very comfortable finding, pinging that ball diagonally, and he was putting Cáceres in a tough spot. And so that's something that Tabarez later referred to, and his quote was, so he said that they were very well prepared and they were technically sound. This is what he's referring to the U.S. They showed that in the first half with a dynamic way of possessing the ball. It caused us problems, and we made adjustments. The number 14 played 30 minutes with complete freedom without anyone marking him. So after that, he said that we adjusted and we played with more composure and we dominated most of the second half. So that is a good thing for the U.S. That the midfield, I thought of Roldan and Ewell, who when they're in those positions, they need to be smart. It's not always a 4-4-2. They're not always sitting next to each other and defending. When they have to be able to shift from a 4-4-2 to a 4-2-2-2 defensive shape. One joins the attack, one is sitting back, and I thought Roldan and Ewell did okay there. I think they were in sync most of the game, and Ewell sat back a little bit more, and Roldan was getting to the penalty area. Like, he had the header that Muslera saved, and so for a while, all those things were working. And I think what Leggett was somewhat effective, but I think that role for Leggett and whoever's going to play there continues to be like a big piece for the U.S. Like, can the holding midfielder and his colleague in the middle, in this case Ewell and Roldan, can they find that other player, between lines and in those creative pockets and cause some issues? So they didn't do that well, and they really didn't have a ball hunting midfielder either. That's why Betancourt never lost possession. They didn't have a guy that was really bothersome, as you're recovering possession. So those are things that I took away from the match. But again, it's really a way to evaluate, talent in a way that they might not all be starters, but Greg Berhalter, I think, has some decisions to make moving forward.
It sounds like you also feel that way about the United States defense. You wrote last night the questions were made about the USA's back four. Who do you feel like impressed from last night, and who do you think, not even necessarily from last night, but generally speaking from like the defensive options, have you maybe seen enough of that you'd rather we move on from?
Yeah, it's a tough question because I think that the back four, I think they look a little fragile. They look a little out of sync. They're thinking a lot. When they're on the ball, it's like it still looks like it's a little bit too big for them, for that part of the tactic and that part of the identity of building from the back. Not that they can't do it, but you can see that they're not all comfortable. I thought Tim Ream obviously stood out. I mean, he looks like a quality defender. Obviously, he plays in England. He looked very comfortable in that role, and he was really clean with his touches, with his passing, in possession, well positioned. Looked like he should be wearing the captain's armband, and I thought he played really well. Aaron Long, on the ball, I think we all agree that there's something there. He can be a ball playing center back. You can't just completely own the guy because he got owned by Brian Rodriguez. But again, that wasn't a good look for them either. A transitional defense isn't just on the back four. You're going back to the midfield as well. But they were really exposed in that part of that part of the game last night. And so I don't think the back four is solved at all. Miles Robinson is still a big project, in my opinion. A lot of upside, a lot of potential, a big time physical presence, and he can improve. And I'm sure, Berhalter mentioned him and a couple of other younger guys as players that will probably be part of this team for the next 8 years. So, but is he ready to just start? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think right back is completely solved yet. I think Cannon does well. But is he the answer? Is he the guy that you want playing, at Honduras or at Costa Rica? Same with the left back position. So I think the back four is we're just wondering like those are going to be some really tough decisions for Greg Berhalter. Yeah. What is the right mix of players, considering what he wants to do, tactically?
Hey everybody, Felipe still has lots to say, but first I get to say that today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Talisman Caps. More specifically, talismancaps.com. They are makers of high-end, quality-made caps that help you support and celebrate your football club. The international window is coming to a close, which means the leagues are about to kick back off. So if you are a fan of pretty much any team in the Premier League or lots of the bigger teams in Europe, they have caps for you. And a thing that I really enjoy is like for some of the bigger teams in, say, England, if you're Arsenal, Chelsea, Spurs, Liverpool, Man United, they have like the letter cap where you could just get the like individual letters that make it clear that you're supporting your club if you want to go that way, that minimalist way, or they've got the kind of minimalist logo. So say for Manchester United, they have like the red pitchfork, not the whole red devil and the whole crest. Maybe some licensing issues there, but just like the pitchfork that shows, hey, I'm a fan, but like you got to know who it is. Same thing with Arsenal. They've got like the cannon, just the cannon alone and not much else. So again, the minimalist design that shows you're the fan without making it like overtly obvious. So you can wear that hat to a bar and show that you're a fan, but not necessarily have it be like brighten in people's faces. And then obviously, if you are a fan of, say, the U.S. national team, either the U.S. men's or the U.S. women's, they have the USA collection, which is vintage jerseys, polos, hats of different types and different styles to represent the U.S. national team, either the men or the women, or U.S. soccer as a whole. Even the '94 World Cup, they've got some throwbacks to that type of gear. They've got the Vintage Vault, which is vintage jerseys from throughout the years, mostly 80s, 90s, and today, which makes me sound like a light rock radio station DJ, but also promoting the Talisman Cap brand. And best of all, they have a discount for our listeners. If you go to talismancaps.com and use the code TOTALSOCCER10, all one word, all together, TOTALSOCCER10 for 10% off any order of $35 or more. So once again, that's talismancaps.com. The code is TOTALSOCCER10 for 10% off any order of $35 or more, which is the price of one hat. So check out what Talisman has on offer, and thank you very much to Talisman for sponsoring today's episode. Now back to Felipe explaining all things national team. So let me ask you this then. Like, there's been much made of the idea of like, have the players bought in? The players are bought in. They're all super into it, or maybe they're not super into it. And like Pulisic went in for a slide tackle in practice. That shows how dedicated he is. Like, I think people are looking for signs that the players are bought into this system, that they have embraced it. I'm wondering for you from last night in the mix zone, or even from Berhalter's press conference, like, did you get the sense that Berhalter was more pleased with things and that maybe it was a slightly less acrimonious than it was after the Mexico game? And then from the players you spoke to, or just that you saw playing in camp, in training, what have you, do you feel like there is sort of a buy-in from the players that everybody's on board, or is there still a little bit of hesitation or confusion?
It's a great question because, I'm coming from covering Atlanta, where we saw that was definitely the case. You had a divided locker room, one part of the locker room buying into what DeBoer wanted to do. The other half of the locker room was like, no, we're not doing it. We play this way. And they needed to find compromise. I don't think that's the case in the U.S. Like, honestly, like, I made an effort to speak to the younger players because I feel like if you only speak to veterans, they know what to say to you. Let's just be honest. Sometimes, like, Brad Guzan is great, like a big time
really
leader, big time goalkeeper, but like it's tough to get something out of them that is really not, I don't want to say genuine or authentic, but they're skilled, in how to give answers without saying too much. And so I chose to speak with Jackson Ewell and Paxton Pomykal before the game, and then I spoke again with Jackson Ewell after the game. And before the game, and it's interesting that you asked me this because I was thinking about this today, is that, like, I feel like they sound like Greg Berhalter sometimes. Like, Jackson Ewell was saying the same things that Greg Berhalter had just told us in the pre-match press conference about the way, about breaking lines, composure, bravery, confidence, pockets, like all these kind of like the terminology. it was just coming out of their mouths, especially Jackson Newell, which is probably a guy that's in camp and he's just like absorbing everything, knowing that this is a big opportunity for him. And Paxton as well. Paxton sounds like a guy, I was really impressed with him. He is a very confident guy. I think he's very confident in his abilities. He's confident in his teammates, even. I think that the quote that you read to me off the air is probably misconstrued, but at the same time, I think that sounds just like him. He's a guy that will tell you exactly how it is. And when I asked him about, you're playing Uruguay tomorrow, we know what Uruguay's identity is. What do you want teams that come in, to a U.S. stadium playing you guys? What do you want them to think? And he's just like, we want to be a powerhouse. We want them to know that they can't beat us here. And it's just like, he's kind of like oozing confidence, but is it naive? Like, I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but he also had rave reviews about Greg Berhalter. He was like, I'm very lucky to go from Luchi Gonzalez, Tab Ramos, and now Greg Berhalter, like 3 different managers, but 3 very smart managers, where tactics are important, things like that. So I think he's getting, Greg Berhalter is getting to the players. I truly believe that they know what he wants. It's probably difficult when they don't get the results. But I mean, we're talking about Mexico. It's so much is involved when you play Mexico. It's not just about playing out of the back and breaking lines and all that. You're playing a rival. The stadium is hostile. Every touch is important, and I think they're still dealing with that too. They're dealing with that type of pressure, and they're dealing with having to execute and conceptualize new tactics on the fly. So, but I think they're buying in. I truly do believe that they, right now, early in this process, the players see something, they want to be part of it.
So I know you got a deadline. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but there's one more thing I wanted to ask about. We had Paul Tenorio on the show last night. He mentioned that you had written a piece, I'm not sure how long ago. Maybe it was from the early days of Tata Martino, but it was about sort of how Martino went about developing Atlanta to play his way and the kind of growing pains that happened there. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that from like the Atlanta perspective, but as it relates to Greg Berhalter, sort of having seen a team develop and buy into a manager's style of play and sort of the evolution of that team. And I'm wondering if you see any correlations between that in Atlanta and this U.S. national team in terms of how the players are embracing what Berhalter wants them to do.
Yeah, I absolutely do see correlations. I think it's just fascinating that, Tata Martino and Greg Berhalter are always going to be connected in a way. It's just not ever going to go away as long as they're managing these 2 countries. And we know that they have great respect for each other. Tata, when we were covering, him and Atlanta United, anytime they were coming up against the Columbus Crew, he was really, he really enjoyed talking about the way that Greg Berhalter, had Columbus playing, and he felt like they were one of the best teams in MLS, one of the strongest teams in MLS, and one of the few teams that had an identity, that he knew that they had a style of play and a belief in a system. And so that's very important coming from an Argentine manager, because, my personal opinion is there aren't a lot of teams in MLS that have identities, and not yet. It's improving slowly. But that was what made Atlanta under Tata Martino so fascinating and so different, is because right away they came in and said, we're going to play this way. These are our convictions. This is what we believe in. We're going to win this way. We're going to lose this way. And of course, he makes adjustments depending on, the opponent they're facing, or, the stakes that are at play. Tata would do that. But, really early on, and to go back to your original question, when they're coming off the 2017 loss to the Columbus Crew, ironically, and at Atlanta in a shootout.
I forgot that's who it was. Yeah, I remember them losing the shootout. I forgot it was Columbus.
So it was Columbus again. Justin Merrim was on Columbus, and the other day I talked to him, and we were talking about just winning mentality, and he was like, "This team," speaking about Atlanta, he's like, "They haven't lost anything big since we beat them here in Atlanta." And I thought about it for a second, like, yeah, I guess you could, they haven't had a big shock since then. And it was a shock. And so immediately after that game in 2017, and the piece, if you look for it on The Athletic, it's a big kind of a feature that I did on Jeff Larentowicz last season. And Jeff Larentowicz is the key part of the story, because he was the one that told it to me, and he ended up being very important to the system. So he was like, as soon as we lose, the next time we're allowed to train, we're at the training center, and Tata's like, we're going with 3 in the back. We're playing 3 in the back today. And there was some confusion, and there was some of the players were apprehensive, and not just because it was 3 in the back, but because he was like, oh yeah, and by the way, our center backs are going to overlap in attack, and they're going to be in the box, and our wing backs are going to do this, and it was just like full force attacking soccer. And Lorena was just telling me that, like, the guys are, the first training session, some guys are coming off the field like, what are we doing? Like, Tata wants us in the box. Like, I'm a defender, and And then in his case, then he was told, oh, and you Jeff, we're going to start playing from the back, and you're going to receive it from Brad at the top of the box, at your own box. You're going to have a guy on your back, and we're going to play through this. And so Jeff Larentowicz, who had at this point in his career had already played probably 350 MLS games, had never been in this situation ever. And he's telling me about how there's a fear factor involved. He remembers doing it like against I think the New York Red Bulls in the inaugural game, or no, later in the 2018 season when they started to do it. I'm sorry. And the opposing MLS teams, he told me, he was like, "You guys are crazy. Like, what are you doing? We're going to kill you guys." And so as soon as he realized that, like, they could play out of it, and they had certain players like Miguel Almiron, that if you can break lines and get it to him, you've got an opposing team pressing you because you're playing out of the back, you're opening up space, and you're just beating guys, you're beating teams, ruthlessly. So, but it was very hard for them. It wasn't something that they just accepted. Now, the South Americans, on the other hand, they were okay with it. You have a guy like Leandro Gonzalez Pires that when I spoke to him last season about Tata and the belief system, and this guy was like, he would get so intense when he would talk about what they believe in. And he was like, it was coming off a 2-0 loss at the New York Red Bulls last season, right towards the end of the season, big game for Atlanta United. They lose. And he's like, yeah, we lost. We got outplayed a little bit, but we're not going to change. This is how we play. And when we lose, we realize we believe in it even more. And so there is a correlation here happening with the U.S. and Greg Berhalter, because he's asking these guys, young guys that are, they don't play in the same system around the world. Some guys are in MLS. Yeah, now he's asking them to do a lot more, to take in a lot more very quickly, playing out of the back, being brave, making mistakes. And the microscope is on. It's all under the microscope. It's magnified because of the 2018 failure. So there are correlations, and I think those two managers, what they have in common is that they tend to not deviate. They believe in something, and when they believe in something, it's tough to argue with them. And they see progress when us on the outside, we see losses, and we see guys that may not be ready or may not be technically sound. They see opportunity.
So what I'm hearing from you is that we should expect the U.S. men's national team to win MLS Cup this year or next year, and then U.S. Open Cup the following year. Is that how it works? That's the correlation.
Remember in the 90s when national teams would play club teams?
There we go.
Maybe we need to get back to that. And then the U.S. would really be competitive.
There we go. All right, cool. All right. Well, until that happens, I'm guessing we'll have you on to talk about other things, Felipe. But thank you, as always, for coming on the show. I know you got your deadline. I don't want to take up more of your time, but I just wanted to say, Felipe Cardenas, thank you very much, as always, for helping me make sense of the U.S. national team, as well as many other things.
You're welcome. Yeah, and look out for the piece on The Athletic. It is a little bit big picture. I mean, to your point, Taylor, it's hard to take a lot away from that match against Uruguay, but I think it is an opportunity to look at what is the long-term plan. And I know U.S. fans probably don't want to hear that because it's a sore spot for them. Like why are we here? But it is a big picture moment leading into Nations League, big matches against Canada, and then you're just a year away from qualifying. So it's an opportunity to say, okay, is this plan working, and what exactly is it?
All right. Well, I will look out for that. In the meantime, I will link to the Jeff Lorenowitz feature. Paul did say it was one of the defenders that you had profiled, and that's where that story came about. So I will try to find that and link to it for people who subscribe to The Athletic. If you don't, you should probably do that, and you should go ahead and follow Felipe on Twitter as well, because he was out there breaking news. You were telling us who was going to be starting. I saw you post it on Reddit. You made it to the big time, Felipe.
Oh, did I? Not only did I make it to St. Louis, but I made it on Reddit.
There we go.
All right.
Those are the
big
dreams.
Big things, yeah.
All right, Felipe. Well, thank you very much once again. We always enjoy having you on the show.
All right, Taylor. Anytime.